morning and welcome to the flax crop at Braddonsville. What you see before me, what almost looks like a bunch of weeds with these beautiful blue, white flowers, is actually flax. Now before we get started with the pulling and processing of flax, I want to touch on the importance of this crop in the 18th century. There are several different textiles that can be used, one of which is wool. Today I have on a wool petticoat, which is nice and light. Wool can also be used for regimentals, or what we would call army fatigues today, or even overcoats and cloaks, things like that. Wool is primarily going to be used in the colder temperatures or even in the rain. Another textile that we find is silk, such as my bonnet. Silk is going to be more of an upper class sort of fabric and something that will be used for smaller items. Now another textile that's going to be very common for upper class, upper middle class sort of people will be cotton, which we talk a lot about in the context of the 19th century. But cotton in the 18th century, well, it's quite a pain because you individually have to pull each seed out because the cotton gin hasn't been invented yet. So primarily flax is going to be a crop that's not only easy to come by and you can sow in nice, cool, damp sort of climates, but it's also going to be a crop that's easy to process and pull. Now, when you look at your flax crop, first you want to plant it early spring, early to mid-spring, and when it pops up, it will flower, like I said, with these beautiful flowers, and you want to wait until each rod is yellow, about halfway up. That's when you'll know to just pull it out of the ground. Now, we want to directly pull it out of the ground, as you can see with these roots, because the fibers run all the way down into these roots. You don't want to cut those fibers off and miss all of that. Flax comes to the Americas as early as 1619 in Jamestown, where it was actually attempted to be a cash crop, although it did fail and didn't really work out for those in Jamestown. There are different pamphlets that actually outline how to sow crops such as flax, talk about processing it, and going through the stages of flax. There's one pamphlet from 1769 that actually talks about taking these little seeds from the ends, and when it's time to sow them promiscuously around a brand new field. Believe it or not, you know flax quite a lot in a modern context. These little pods we see at the end are actually where the seeds lie, and if we crush them open, we can actually see flax seed, which is used a lot in modern different cereals, granolas, things like that. If you're a woodworker or a carpenter, you've also used it in the context of linseed oil. Linseed oil is simply the crushed up seed pods and seeds themselves ground up into a paste. So the first step in this process, after actually sowing the seeds and getting it to grow, is to pull it up by the root. As I've said before, we're going to collect it in bunches, and after we've done this entire field, we're actually going to hang it up to dry up in the attic. Now that we've pulled up all the flax from the field outside, we've come to the attic at the McConnell's house to come and lay out all the flax that we've pulled. Here, we'll just loosely lay it out on the floorboards and let it dry for several weeks. Depending on the humidity, it may take 3, 4, 5 weeks to do. And then we'll go to our next step, which is retting. So now we've let our flax dry in the McConnell's cabin attic for 2 to 3 weeks. What this has done is simply dried the flax so that it's not bendy like a blade of grass. It's more become like a crunchy straw. Our next process that we're going to be going into is something called retting. Now, there are different ways to ret flax, one of which is actually to spread the flax out thinly across the dew of grass. Thankfully, the humidity and the heavy dew here in South Carolina really help with this process. So we're going to spread it out and we'll leave it here for somewhere between 17 to 20 days, depending upon the weather. Another way that we can do it, and as they would have done in the 18th century, is put it in a tub or really any vat of water. Many primary accounts talk about putting your flax in a creek bed. So to do this actually makes it a little bit of a faster process. It might take a week and a half, depending again upon the weather. Now, the risk with putting something like this in the creek, not only might you lose it if there's a flood, but this actually expedites the process so much so that it might even mold and ruin your crop. So the reason that we're retting this flax is because now it's surrounded by this hard shell. What we want to reach are the inner fibers. And so what we're seeking to do is actually rot away the pectin that's holding together these hard shells so that we can then break down the shells and get the fibers inside. Now that we've let our flax ret, both lying on the ground with the dew and have left it in the creek, the stalks and the fibers themselves have actually begun to separate. As you can see here, this hard stalk and these fibers are what we're going to work to separate today. So our next step is to break the stalks apart. This is our flax break, which I'll be lifting, putting some of our flax in. This is our flax that we dew retted. We'll be separating it out and then just letting it drop. By this point in time, now that we've broken those hard stalks from the fibers, we have a wily mess of things here. These hard stalks, you can see against these kind of wild hairs that are actually the fibers. By now we should have a nice long bout of our flax, and what we're going to do is take it and put it on our scutching board, which we have right here. This is essentially going to knock these hard outer shells away from our flax. So what you'll see here is a lot of trash flying off of our fibers here. Those are those hard stalks that we're trying to separate from the fibers themselves. Now that we've separated most of those hard shells from the fibers of the flax, we have this nice long grouping of the flax itself. What we're going to do for our next step is run it through our hackles, which we have right here. Now what we're going to do is really refine the fibers. As you can see here, this hackle is a little bit larger. Those spaces between the nails have a wider gap versus this one, which is a little bit smaller. This is really going to refine our fibers, like I say, and get those stalks out of our grouping of fibers. Once we've run through the hackles at a satisfactory rate, we'll come out with two things. One is this rougher looking bunch of fibers that we actually call tow. Tow, again, is a little bit like trash. It's really used today. We use it as fire starter, but this, as you can see, has a little bit more of the stalks in it. It's going to be harder to spin and weave into actual fabric. So what you really want out of all of this is this lovely, very finely run through flax fiber. This is what you're going to take to your spinning wheel, later weave into cloth. So if you've ever heard of a tow-headed child or a flaxen-haired maiden, well, here are the two products that those sayings actually come from. Now this is what's going to be used to make clothing such as what I'm wearing. Of course, this is the natural color of our linen or flax. You could dye it to make it white, such as the inner part of the checks on my apron. You can also dye it different colors, really whichever one you choose out of the natural color base that they would have had here in the 18th century.